In the early 1990s, the television show Captain Planet and the Planeteers was a cartoon about 5 kids trying to stop evil villains from destroying the Earth and its natural resources. Together with their elemental rings of power, they could call forth the mighty Captain Planet, a guardian superhero who would typically overcome some terrible obstacle to end the story. It ran for an incredible 6 seasons and had over 100 episodes. Outside of the show itself, it spawned toys, comic books, and even video games. Among the latter was a Sega Mega Drive release that made its way out in Asian and PAL territories. Developed by Nova Logic, it was released in early 1993, a project commissioned by Sega themselves, who would also publish the title. A popular cartoon handled by Sega had to be a winner, right? Let's find out. The story here mirrors what you saw on the TV show closely. The villain Zarm has captured nearly the entire group of Planeteers, and each one must defeat a stage and a boss to break free. Only then can the team call forth Captain Planet and end the game. While you can choose the stage itself, the Planeteer you use is chosen at random. The gameplay from there is a pure action platformer. Each Planeteer can jump, crawl, grab onto certain things in the environment, and has the ability to shoot projectiles via their eco-powered rings. There are 2 versions of that shot, a weak and a strong, the latter of which has a larger spread. You can shoot while crouching as well as up and diagonally. This shot is governed by planet power in the lower left, and should it run out, your attack is slowed substantially and is severely limited. Your regular shot can only be used every 3 seconds at this point, and your power shot can't be used at all. Your health is represented by the Earth icons in the top left below the score. Keep in mind that both your life and planet power can be overcharged, so be sure to pick up any icons the enemies drop, even if the meters are full. Each captured member must complete a task on the 4 opening stages, which is usually destroying some machine or turning something off. For example, in the sewers, there are 8 pipes dumping toxic waste all over the level, and you need to close the valves to stop that. In the giant electrical computer complex, you must destroy the terminals that are running the place, and the robots protecting them, so on and so forth. The stages are heavily reliant on platforming and are typically multiple screens high. Enemies can infest these stages, everything from rats, robots, and even tiny nuclear-powered men. Enemies can drop life and planet power icons every so often. Once the stage is taken care of, you must defeat the boss of that area. These boss encounters are the bad guys from the TV show, usually in some machine or contraption you must overcome. The game doesn't use traditional lives or continues, and instead implements a 1-hour timer. If you die, you get booted out to the main hub and lose valuable time, but can keep playing as long as the timer is active. You can only see the game clock on the hub, so you'll want to keep track of it between stages and deaths. As you may have guessed, Captain Planet only supports 1 player. The visuals of Captain Planet are unspectacular. What color is used isn't bad, and the characters represent their cartoon counterparts rather well. Unfortunately, the backgrounds lack any meaningful detail. Parallax scrolling is simplistic in every area, and the bosses feature no interesting special effects or animations. Even the formation of Captain Planet himself is 2 seconds of throwaway frames instead of what could have been a spectacular reward for all your hard work. One of its biggest visual issues is the lack of variety. There are just 5 total stages, and 2 of those feature many of the same assets. The final stage is essentially an extended boss fight, so there's nothing there to speak of. That leaves precious little to appreciate, since there are no outstanding designs in animation or special effects to make up the difference. This game released in 1993 and yet shipped on a 4 megabit cartridge, a surefire indicator that Sega had zero faith that this product would sell well. In fact, given this game only has 5 levels and doesn't use the 5th Planeteer at all, I would surmise that it was intended to be longer at some point in development and come on a much larger cartridge. By 1993, the Mega Drive had been getting 8 and 16 megabit games frequently, which often featured loads of great animation, special effects, and a ton of variety. This tiny cartridge never stood a chance to impress anyone this late in the console's life. The music in Captain Planet is serviceable. It isn't bad, nor is it something you'll be appreciating outside of the game. Each area has its own track, so the variety at the very least is there. It's powered by gems, and all of us have heard much worse music on the Genesis. Where the game really falters heavily is in its sound effects. There's some cranium-shattering stuff here that makes no sense whatsoever. So confused by this, I broke out multiple variations of the hardware to make sure something wasn't wrong. Here is an example of just how bad it can be. Like many poor games, there is a framework in place of what could have been a decent game here. The idea that the Planeteers need to be saved to unlock the final area brings to mind games like Shinobi for the Game Gear. But all similarities end there because the problems overwhelm this completely. As I mentioned before, content is a serious issue. There are 4 main stages and 1 extended boss fight before the game ends. But things are actually a lot worse than that. Of those 4 main stages, the largest is the sewer hideout and is the main body of the game. Once that level is defeated, you move on to the other 3, which are much smaller and take no time to defeat. That creates an imbalance because once you master the sewer hideout, you have essentially seen the majority of what this game has to offer. This game is in desperate need of another few levels, even if those levels were extremely short. Another issue is that none of the Planeteers are special. While the game does label their powers, they all act the same and do the same damage. The heroes themselves have no defining characteristics. They all move at the same speed, they all jump the same height, and they all crawl the same. They are essentially clones of one another that just use a different sprite. This was a major missed opportunity. Stages could have been designed around their eco powers specifically, but even their physical builds could have been taken into account, such as speed and jumping. Anything to help these guys feel different from one another and give them the tiniest bit of personality. I also would have liked to have seen a level dedicated to Captain Planet. After he is formed, he is stuck in one boss fight and that's it. You don't get a stage to unleash your powers and feel like a superhero. That's a real shame for fans, because that is an essential part of the animated show. You also get nothing special in terms of power with him. You can fly, but the main shot and your power shot really are no different in practice from the Planeteers, making him feel underwhelming and continues this game's severe lack of personality. My final issue are those garbage sound effects. Some areas are worse than others, but once they have their way with you, the damage is done. In the end, Captain Planet is a hollow representation of the TV show, its characters, and its story. As a game, it's poorly designed, lacks variety and control, graphics, special effects, and objectives, and worse yet, it's overly easy on anything other than the hardest setting. That 1 hour time limit is more than enough to exhaust this title's content, and you're likely to beat it the very first time you play it. I wasn't the only one down on Captain Planet and the Planeteers for the Mega Drive. The magazines of the time dumped all over it, rating it well below average. Even when one of them actually enjoyed the gameplay, the other flaw still caused them to dislike the overall quality. Since this was never officially released in the US back then, I didn't discover it until much later. It was then that I found out that Brazil got a release thanks to Tectoy. Europe saw it published by Sega themselves, and Asia got it all over outside of Japan, including a Chinese version. So why didn't Japan or North America see it? Did Sega lack confidence after seeing what the developer had produced? And speaking of the developer, Nova Logic had not done anything of note when Sega brought them on board to make this game for the Mega Drive. They had only basically done computer ports of other companies' games. Captain Planet was their first original console work, and I think it showed the studio wasn't ready for prime time, or that Sega had strangled them so fiercely of time and resources that producing anything of merit was impossible. The very next time Nova Logic worked with Sega, it was to produce the awful Saturn helicopter game Blackfire, a title that itself left a lot to be desired. I think what we have here was Sega throwing everything it could against the wall to see what would stick. They needed games badly, and they were pumping them out cheap and quick to satiate a market looking for quality, not quantity. The Genesis and Mega Drive saw an explosion of these low-quality efforts in 1993, and they continued well into 94 and 95, which correlates perfectly with the Super Nintendo's popularity surge while Sega's reputation was taking a beating. Western-made trash had choked out Sega's light long before the Saturn ever had a chance to shine. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.